The Ascent of Mount Carmel, by St. John of the Cross. Translated by David Lewis. The stanzas. Argument. The following stanzas are a summary of the doctrine contained in this book of the Ascent of Mount Carmel. They also describe how we are to ascend to the summit of it, that is, to the high estate of perfection, called here union of the soul with God. I place all the stanzas together, because what I have to say is founded upon them. Thus the whole substance of my book may be comprehended at once. I shall also transcribe each stanza again, and each line separately, as the nature of my work requires. The stanzas. In an obscure night, with anxious love inflamed, O happy lot! Forth unobserved I went, my house being now at rest. In darkness and obscurity, by the secret ladder disguised, O happy lot! In darkness and concealment, my house being now at rest. In that happy night, in secret, seen of none, seeing naught myself, without other light or guide, save that which in my heart was burning. That light guided me, more surely than the noonday sun, to the place where he was waiting for me, whom I knew well, and where none but he appeared. O guiding night! O night more lovely than the dawn! O night that hast united the lover with his beloved, and changed her into her love. On my flowery bosom, kept whole for him alone, he reposed and slept. I kept him, and the waving of the cedars fanned him. Then his hair floated in the breeze that blew from the turret. He struck me on the neck with his gentle hand, and all sensation left me. I continued in oblivion lost. My head was resting on my love. I fainted away, abandoned, and, amidst the lilies forgotten, threw all my cares away. Prologue. The dark night through which the soul passes, on its way to the divine light of the perfect union of the love of God, so far as it is in this life possible, requires for its explanation greater experience and light of knowledge than I possess. For so great are the trials and so profound the darkness, spiritual as well as corporal, which souls must endure if they will attain to perfection, that no human knowledge can comprehend them, nor experience describe them. He only who has passed through them can know them, but even he cannot explain them. Therefore, while touching but slightly on the subject of this dark night, I trust neither to experience nor to knowledge, for both may mislead me, but solely to the Holy Scriptures, under the teaching of which I cannot err, because he who speaks therein is the Holy Ghost. Nevertheless, I accept the aid of experience and knowledge, and if through ignorance I should err, it is not my intention to depart from the sound doctrine of our Holy Mother, the Catholic Church. I resign myself absolutely to her light, and bow down before her decisions, and moreover to the better judgment therein of private men, be they who they may. It is not any personal fitness which I recognize in myself that has led me to undertake this work, so high and so difficult, but solely my trust in our Lord, who, I hope, will enable me to speak on account of the great necessities of many souls. Many persons begin to walk in the way of virtue, our Lord longing to lead them into the obscure night that they may travel onwards into the divine union, but make no progress. Sometimes because they will not enter upon this night, or suffer him to lead them into it, and sometimes also because they do not understand their own state, and are destitute of fit and wise directors who may guide them to the summit of the mount. How miserable it is to see many souls, to whom God has given grace to advance, and who, had they taken courage, would have reached perfection, remain satisfied with narrow-minded views of God's dealings, through want of will, or through ignorance, or because there is not one to direct their steps, and to teach them how to go onwards from the beginning. And in the end, when our Lord has compassion on them, and leads them on in spite of these hindrances, they arrive late, with much difficulty, and less merit, because they have not submitted themselves to His ways, nor suffered Him to plant their feet on the pure and certain road of union. Though it is true that God, who conducts them, can do so without these helps, still, because they do not yield themselves up to Him, they make less progress on the road, resisting their guide, and they merit less because they do not submit their will, whereby their sufferings are increased. There are souls who, instead of abandoning themselves to the care and protection of God, hinder Him rather by their indiscreet behaviour, or resist Him like little children who, when their mothers would carry them in their arms, struggle and cry that they may be allowed to walk. These souls make no progress, or if they do, it is comparable only to the walking of an infant child. So then, that men may know, beginners as well as those who have made some progress, how to resign themselves into the hands of God when it is His pleasure to lead them, I propose, by His help, to furnish some directions, so they may understand the matter for themselves, or at least submit to the guidance of God. Some confessors and spiritual directors, because they have no perception or experience of these ways, are a hindrance and an evil, rather than a help to such souls. They are like the builders of Babel, who, when required to furnish certain materials, furnished others of a very different sort, because they knew not the language of those around them, and thus the building was stopped. Come ye therefore, saith God, let us go down, and there confound their tongues, that they may not understand one another's speech. And so the Lord scattered them. It is a hard and miserable thing for souls, when they cannot comprehend their own state, nor meet with any who can. For when God leads anyone along the highest road of obscure contemplation and aridity, such a one will think himself lost. And in this darkness and affliction, temptation and distress, some will be sure to tell him, like the comforters of Job, that his sufferings are the effects of melancholy, or disordered health, or of natural temperament, or, it may be, of some secret sin for which God has abandoned him. Yea, they will decide that he is, or that he has been, exceedingly wicked, seeing that he is thus afflicted. Some also will say that he is going backwards, because he finds no consolation or pleasure as before in the things of God. Thus they multiply the sorrows of this poor soul. For his greatest trial is the knowledge of his own misery, when it seems to him clearer than light that he is full of evil and sin, because God enables him, as I shall hereafter explain, to see this in the obscure night of contemplation. And so, when he meets with those who tell him, in accordance with his own impressions, that his troubles arise out of his own sins, his grief and misery are infinitely increased, and rendered more bitter than death. Such confessors as these, not satisfied with considering all his sorrows to flow from past sins, compel him to retrace his whole life, and to make frequent general confessions, putting him on the rack anew. They do not understand that this is not the time for such acts, but that it is now the day of God's purgation, and when they ought to leave him alone, comforting him indeed, and encouraging him to bear his trials patiently until God shall be pleased to deliver him, for until then, notwithstanding all they may say or do, there can be no relief. I have to treat this matter hereafter, and how the soul is to be guided, and how the confessor is to conduct himself with regard to his penitent, and what are the signs whereby we may ascertain whether this be a state of purgation, and if it be, whether of sense or of spirit. This is the obscure night, and whether or not it be the effect of melancholy or any other imperfection of body or soul. For there are persons who will think, or their confessors for them, that God is leading them along the road of the obscure night of spiritual purgation, and yet, perhaps, all is nothing but imperfection of sense and spirit. And others also who will think that they do not pray when they pray much, and on the other hand, there are others who think they pray much when they do not in reality pray scarcely at all. There are some, and it is sad to see them, who toil and labour wearying themselves, and yet go backwards, because they make the fruit which is profitable to consist in that which profits not, but which is rather a hindrance. And others who, in rest and quietness, make great advancement. Others also there are who turn the graces and gifts of God, given them for their advancement, into embarrassments and stumbling blocks on this road. Those who travel on this road will meet with many occasions of joy and sorrow, hope and pain, some of which are the result of the spirit of perfection, others of imperfections. I shall endeavour, by God's help, to speak of all, so that everyone who shall read my book may, in some degree, see the road he takes, and that which he ought to take, if he wishes to ascend to the summit of this mount. As my book treats of the obscure night in which the soul journeys on to God, let no one be surprised if he finds it also somewhat obscure. It will be so certainly at first, but as the reader advances he will understand it better, for one part of it will throw light on another. If it be read a second time, it will become more intelligible, and the doctrine it contains will appear the more certain. But if still there should be any to whom it shall seem hard, let them ascribe it to my ignorance and poor style, for the matter of it is in itself good and most necessary. But after all, I believe that, if I had written it in a more perfect manner, many would not appreciate it, because its contents are not those moralities and soothing matters which those spiritual persons run after who desire to draw near to God in pleasant ways, but a solid and substantial doctrine suited to all, if they seek to advance to the detachment of spirit which is here described. My principal object, however, is not to address myself to all, but only to certain persons of our holy religion of Mount Carmel, who by the grace of God are on the pathway of this mount. It is at their request I have undertaken my task. They, indeed, already detached from the things of this life, will better understand this doctrine of detachment of spirit. Book 1. The nature of the obscure night, the necessity of passing through it in order to attain to the divine union, and specially the obscure night of sense and desire, with the evils which these inflict on the soul. Chapter 1. Two kinds of this night, corresponding with the divisions of the soul into higher and lower. Stanza 1. In an obscure night, with anxious love inflamed, O happy lot, forth unobserved I went, my house being now at rest. This stanza describes the happy state of the soul at its departure from all things, from the appetites and imperfections of our sensual nature, to which all are subject because of our disobedience to reason. I mean that, in order to reach perfection, the soul has to pass, ordinarily, through two kinds of night, which spiritual writers call purgations, or purifications of the soul, and which I have called night, because in the one as well as in the other, the soul travels, as it were, by night, in darkness. The first is the night, or purgation of the sensual part of the soul, treated of in this first stanza, and described in the first part of this book. The second is the night of the spiritual part, of which the second stanza speaks, and which I shall discuss in the second part of my work, so far as it relates to the soul's activity therein, and in the third and fourth part, so far as it relates to its passive condition in it. The meaning of the stanzas, then, is, that the soul went forth, led of God, through love of Him only, and with that love inflamed, into the obscure night, which is the privation of and purgation from all sensual desires in all external things, all the pleasures of the flesh, and all the satisfactions of the will. This is wrought in this purgation of the will, and for this reason it is said that the soul departed its house, that is, the sensual part, being at rest, all the desires being at rest and asleep, and the soul asleep to them, for there is no departing from the pains and vexations of desire, till it be mortified and put to sleep. The happy lot of the soul, then, is this unobserved departure, when no carnal desire or aught else was able to detain it, and also in that this departure took place by night, which is the privation of all desire wrought by God, a condition which is as night to the soul. The happy lot of the soul then consists in being led by God into this night, from which so great a blessing results, but into which it could not have entered of itself, because no one is able in his own strength to empty his heart of all desires, so as to draw near unto God. This is the meaning of the stanzas. I now proceed to explain each line of it separately, and to discuss the subject of this book. Chapter 2. The nature and cause of the obscure night. In an obscure night. The journey of the soul to the divine union is called night for three reasons. The first is derived from the point from which the soul sets out, the privation of the desire of all pleasures, in all the things of this world, by an entire detachment therefrom. This is as night for every desire and sense of man. The second, from the road by which it travels, that is, faith, for faith is obscure like night to the intellect. The third, from the goal to which it tends, God, incomprehensible and infinite, who in this life is as night to the soul. We must pass through these three nights if we are to attain to the divine union with God. They are foreshadowed in Holy Scripture by the three nights which were to elapse, according to the command of the angel, between the betrothal and the marriage of the younger Tobias. When thou shalt take her, said the angel, go into the chamber, and for 3 days keep thyself continent from her. On the first night he was to burn the liver of the fish in the fire, which is the heart whose affections are set on the things of this world, and which, if it will enter on the road that leadeth unto God, must be burned up and purified of all created things in the fire of this love. This purgation drives away the evil spirit who has dominion over our soul, because of our attachment to those pleasures which flow from temporal and corporal things. The second night, said the angel, thou shalt be admitted into the society of the holy patriarchs, the fathers of the faith. The soul having passed the first night, which is the privation of all sensible things, enters immediately into the second night, alone in pure faith, and by it alone directed, for faith is not subject to sense. The third night, said the angel, thou shalt obtain a blessing, that is, God, who, in the second night of faith, communicates himself so secretly and so intimately to the soul. This is another night, inasmuch as this communication is more obscure than the others, as I shall presently explain. When this night is over, which is the accomplishment of the communication of God in spirit, ordinarily effected when the soul is in great darkness, the union with the bride, which is the wisdom of God, immediately ensues. The angel adds also, saying to Tobias, when the third night is past, thou shalt take the virgin with the fear of the Lord. This fear is then perfect when it is also the love of God, and it is made perfect when the soul is by love transformed in God. I shall speak of these three causes separately, that they may be the better understood, first reminding the reader that the 3 nights are but one divided into 3 parts. The first, which is that of the senses, may be likened to the commencement of night, when material objects begin to be invisible. The second, of faith, may be compared to midnight, which is utter darkness. The third resembles the close of night, which is God, when the dawn of day is at hand. Chapter 3. The first cause, the privation of the desire. The privation of all pleasures to the desire in all things is here called night. For as night is nothing else but the absence of light, and consequently of visible objects, whereby the faculty of vision remains in darkness unemployed, so the mortification of the desires is as night to the soul. For when the soul denies itself those pleasures which outward things furnish to the desire, it is as if it were in darkness, without occupation. As the faculty of vision is nourished by light and fed by visible objects, and ceases to be so fed when the light is withdrawn, so the soul by means of the desire feeds on those things which, corresponding with its powers, give it pleasure. But when the desire is mortified, it derives no more pleasure from them, and thus, so far as the desire is concerned, the soul abides in darkness, without occupation. This may be illustrated in the case of all the faculties of the soul. When the soul denies itself the pleasure arising from all that gratifies the ear, it remains, so far as the faculty of hearing is concerned, in darkness, without occupation. And when it denies itself all that is pleasing to the eye, it remains in darkness, so far as it relates to the faculty of sight. The same may be said of the other senses, so that he who shall deny himself all satisfaction derivable from external objects, mortifying the desire thereof, may be said to be in a state which is as night, and this is nothing else but an entire detachment from all things. Philosophers say that the soul is a blank when first infused into the body, without knowledge of any kind whatever, and incapable of receiving knowledge, in the course of nature, in any other way than through the senses. Thus, while in the body, the soul is like a man imprisoned in darkness, who has no knowledge of what passes without beyond what he can learn by looking through the window of his cell, and who, if he did not so look, could in no other way learn anything at all. Thus, then, the soul cannot naturally know anything beyond what reaches it through the senses, which are the windows of its cell. If then the impressions and communications of sense be neglected and denied, we may well say that the soul is in darkness and empty, because according to this opinion there is no other natural way for knowledge or light to enter in. It is true, indeed, that we cannot help hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, and touching, but this is of no moment, and does not trouble the soul when the objects of sense are repelled, any more than if we neither heard nor saw. For he who shuts his eyes is as much in darkness as a blind man who cannot see. This is the meaning of the psalmist when he said, "I am poor, and in labours from my youth." He says that he is poor, though it is certain he was rich, because he had not set his mind upon riches. He was really like a poor man. If he had been really poor, yet not in spirit, he would not have been truly poor, for his soul would have been rich, full of desires. I call this detachment the night of the soul, for I am not speaking here of the absence of things, for absence is not detachment if the desire of them remain, but of that detachment which consists in suppressing desire, and avoiding pleasure. It is this that sets the soul free, even though possession may be still retained. The things of this world neither occupy nor injure the soul, because they do not enter within, but rather the will and desire of them which abide within it. This is the night of the sensual part of the soul. And now I proceed to explain how the soul is to depart from its house in the obscure night of sense, in order to be united with God. Chapter 4. The necessity of passing truly through the obscure night of sense, which is the mortification of the desire. The soul must, of necessity, if we would attain to the divine union of God, pass through the obscure night of mortification of the desires, and self-denial in all things. The reason is that all the love we bestow on creatures is, in the eye of God, mere darkness, and that while we are involved therein, the soul is incapable of being enlightened and possessed by the pure and simple light of God, unless we first cast it away. Light hath no fellowship with darkness, for as St. John saith, "The light shineth in darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it." Two contrary qualities, as the philosophers say, cannot coexist in the same subject. Darkness, which is the love of creatures, and light, which is God, are contrary to one another, for what fellowship hath light with darkness? The light of the divine union cannot, therefore, dwell in the soul if these affections are not cast away. The affection and attachment which the soul feels for the creature renders the soul its equal and its like, and the greater the affection, the greater will be the likeness. Love begets a likeness between the lover and the object of his love, and so the psalmist, speaking of those who set their heart upon idols, says, "Let them that make them become like unto them, and all such as trust in them." Thus, he then who loves the creature becomes vile as the creature itself, and in one sense even viler, for love not only levels, but subjects also the lover to the object of his love. He, therefore, who loveth anything beside God, renders his soul incapable of the divine union and transformation in God, for the vileness of the creature is much less capable of the dignity of the Creator than darkness is of light. All things in heaven and earth are nothing in comparison with God. I beheld the earth, saith he, and lo, it was void and nothing, and the heavens, and there was no light in them. The earth, void and nothing, signifies that the earth and all it contains are nothing, and the heavens without light, and all the lights of heaven, in comparison with God, are perfect darkness. Thus all created things, with the affections bestowed upon them, are nothing, because they are a hindrance, and the privation of our transformation in God, just as darkness is nothing, and less than nothing, being the absence of light. As he who is in darkness comprehends not the light, so the soul whose affections are given to the creature shall never comprehend God. Until our soul is purged of these affections, we shall not possess God in this life in the pure transformation of love, nor in the life to come in the beatific vision. To make this more clear, I shall enter into some particulars. The whole creation, compared with the infinite being of God, is nothing, and so the soul whose affections are set upon created things is nothing, and even less than nothing before God, because love begets equality and likeness, and even inferiority to the object beloved. Such a soul, therefore, cannot by any possibility be united to the infinite being of God, because that which is not can have no communion with that which is. All the beauty of the creation, in comparison with the infinite beauty of God, is supreme deformity, for favour is deceitful and beauty is vain, and so the soul whose affections are set on the beauty of any created thing whatever shows before God nothing but deformity, and can never be transformed in beauty, which is God, because deformity cannot attain unto beauty. All the grace and comeliness of creation, compared with the grace of God, is supreme disgrace and supreme disfavour, and that soul, therefore, which is captivated by the grace and comeliness of created things, is in the eyes of God in disfavour and disgrace, incapable of the infinite grace and beauty, for that which is ill-favoured is far removed from that which is infinitely gracious. All the goodness of the whole world together, in comparison with the infinite goodness of God, is wickedness rather than goodness, for none is good but God alone, and that soul is, therefore, wicked before God, whose affections are set on the things of this world. And as wickedness can have no fellowship with goodness, so that soul cannot be united in perfect union with God, who is the supreme goodness. All the wisdom of the world, and all human cunning, compared with the infinite wisdom of God, is simple and supreme ignorance. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. He, therefore, who shall labour to attain in union with the wisdom of God, in reliance on his own wisdom and skill, is supremely ignorant, and infinitely distant therefrom, for ignorance knoweth not what wisdom is. They who consider themselves gifted with knowledge are in the eyes of God most ignorant. Professing themselves to be wise, they become fools. They alone attain to the divine wisdom who, like children and ignorant ones, lay aside their own wisdom and serve God in love. This is the wisdom to which the Apostle refers, saying, "Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seem to be wise in this world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise." For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. Ignorance, therefore, and not knowledge, becomes that soul which strives after union with the wisdom of God. All the liberty and power of the world, compared with the power and liberty of the Spirit of God, is but supreme slavery, wretchedness, and captivity. And so he who loves superiority and dignities, and the indulgence of his desires, stands before God not as a son who is free, but as a person of mean condition, the slave of his passions, because he submits not to the holy teaching, which saith, He that is the greater among you, let him become as the younger. Such a one will never attain to the true liberty of spirit, attainable in the divine union, because slavery has no fellowship with liberty. Liberty dwelleth not in a heart subject to desires, for that heart is in captivity, but in that which is free, the heart of a son. It was for this reason that Sarah said unto Abraham, Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. All the sweetness and all the pleasures which all the things of this world furnish to the will are, in comparison with the sweetness and pleasure which is God, supreme pain, torment, and bitterness. He, therefore, who shall set his heart upon them is, in the eyes of God, worthy of pain, torment, and bitterness, and can never attain to those delights with which the divine union abounds. All the riches and glory of the whole creation, compared to the true riches, which is God, is supreme poverty and meanness, and he who sets his heart upon them is, in God's sight, supremely poor and mean, and can never attain to the blessed estate of riches and glory, which is the transformation of the soul in God. For that which is mean and poor is infinitely distant from that which is supremely rich and glorious. For this cause, then, the divine wisdom bewails men, namely, because they make themselves loathsome, mean, wretched, and poor, through their love for that which is beautiful, rich, and noble in the eyes of the world. O ye men, to you I call, and my voice is to the sons of men. O little ones, understand subtlety, and ye unwise, take notice. Hear, for I will speak of great things. With me are riches and glory, glorious riches and justice. For my fruit is better than gold and the precious stones, and my blossoms than choice silver. I walk in the way of justice, in the midst of the paths of judgment, that I may enrich them that love me, and may fill their treasures. Here God addresses himself to those who set their affections on the things of this world. He calls them little ones, because they make themselves little, like the object of their love. He bids them understand subtlety, and take notice, because he is speaking of great things, not of little things, such as they are. He tells them that great riches and glory, objects of their love, are with him and in him, not where they think they shall find him. Glorious riches and justice are with wisdom. For though the things of this world may seem to men to be something, yet let them take notice, the things of God are more. The fruit of wisdom is better than gold and precious stones, and that which wisdom produces in the soul is preferable to the choice silver which men covet. This is applicable to every kind of affection to which we are liable in this life. Chapter 5. Continuation of the same subject. Proofs from Scripture. I have now explained how great is the distance between created things and God, and how souls which set their affections thereon are equally distant from Him, because, as I have said, love begets equality and likeness. This was well understood by St. Augustine, when, considering his own inclination towards the creature, he thus spoke unto God: Miserable man that I am, what fellowship hath my perverseness with thy uprightness? Thou art truly good, I wicked. Thou full of compassion, I impious. Thou holy, I miserable. Thou just, I unjust. Thou art light, I am blind. Thou art life, I am dead. Thou art medicine, I am sick. Thou art supreme truth, and I utter vanity. It is, therefore, Supreme ignorance for any one to think that he can ever attain to the high estate of union with God before he casts away from him the desire of natural things, and of supernatural also, so far as it concerns self-love, because the distance between them and the state of perfection is the very greatest. For Christ our Lord hath said, Every one of you that doth not renounce all that he possesseth cannot be my disciple. The doctrine of Christ which he came into the world to teach is contempt of all things, that we may thereby have power to receive the reward of the Spirit of God. For he who does not withdraw himself from the things of the world is not qualified to receive the Spirit of God in the pure transformation. This truth is foreshadowed in the book of Exodus, where we read that God did not give the manna to the people of Israel till the corn they had brought from Egypt had failed them. For the bread of angels is not given to, neither is it meant for, that palate which is pleased with the bread of man. He who feeds on strange meats, and is delighted therewith, not only disqualifies himself for the reception of the Holy Ghost, but also provokes God to anger exceedingly, as all do who, while they seek spiritual food, are not content with God only, but intermingle therewith carnal and earthly satisfactions. This appears from the same history, where it is said that the people cried, Who will give us flesh to eat? They were not satisfied with food so pure, for they desired and demanded the flesh of beasts. God was grievously offended, because they would mingle flesh so vile and coarse with the pure and heavenly bread, which, though always the same, had in it the sweetness of every taste. For while their meat was in their mouth, the wrath of God came upon them, and he slew the fat ones amongst them, and brought down the chosen men of Israel. God regarded it as an evil wish to desire other food when he was giving them the bread of heaven. Oh, would that spiritual persons knew how they were losing the good things of the Spirit, abundantly furnished, because they will not raise their desires above trifles, and how they might have the sweetness of all things in the pure food of the Spirit, if they would only forego them. But as they will not, so they shall not have such sweetness. The people of Israel perceived not the sweetness of every taste in the manna, though it was there, because they would not limit their desires to it alone. The sweetness and strength of the manna was not for them, not because it was not there, but because they longed for other meats beside it. He who loves any other thing with God makes light of him, because he puts into the balance with him that which is infinitely beneath him. We know by experience that the will, when set on a particular object, magnifies it above all others, if it has no pleasure in them, though they may be of greater importance than what it desires. And if it should desire two things together, it does wrong to the chief of the two, because it establishes an unjust equality between them. There is nothing in the whole world to be compared with God, and therefore he who loves anything together with him wrongs him. And if this be true, what does he do who loves anything more than God? This truth is set before us in the book of Exodus. When God commanded Moses to go up into Mount Sinai, he bade him go up alone. The children of Israel were to remain below, and even the cattle were not to be fed in sight of the mountain. Thou shalt stand with me on the top of the mount, let no man go up with thee, and let not any man be seen throughout all the mount, neither let the oxen nor the sheep feed over against it. He therefore that will go up into the mount of perfection and hold communion with God must not only abandon everything, but restrain even his desires, the sheep and the cattle, from feeding in sight of the mount, that is, upon anything which is not simply God, in whom, in the estate of perfection, every desire must cease. This journey or ascent must therefore be a perpetual struggle with our desires to make them cease, and the more earnest we are, the sooner we shall reach the summit. But until the desires cease, we can never reach it, notwithstanding our many virtues, for virtue is not perfectly acquired before our souls are empty, detached, and purified from all desire. Of this truth we have a lively figure in the history of the patriarch Jacob. When he was on his way to Bethel to build an altar for sacrifice unto God, he commanded his household the observance of 3 things: the casting away of strange gods, self-purification, and the changing of their garments. Jacob, having called together all his household, said, Cast away the strange gods that are among you, and be cleansed, and change your garments. He, therefore, who will ascend to the mount of perfection, to build an altar there, whereon to offer God the sacrifice of pure love, praise, and adoration, must first of all perfectly fulfill the 3 commandments of Jacob. He must cast away the strange gods, the earthly affections and attachments. He must purify himself from the impressions which the desires have made on the soul, in the obscure night of sense, denying them and doing penance for their past indulgence, and, in the 3rd place, he must change his garments. This God himself will do during the observance of the first 2 commandments. He will change them from old into new, by infusing into the soul a new understanding of God in God, the human understanding being set aside, and a new love of God in God, the will being detached from its old desires and human satisfactions, by bringing the soul into a state of new knowledge and of deep delight, all other knowledge and old imaginings being cast away. And finally, by causing that which is of the old man to cease, which is our natural aptitudes, and investing us with a new supernatural aptitude corresponding with the powers of the soul, so that all that is human in the action of the soul may become divine. This is the object gained in the estate of union, in which the soul is nothing else but an altar of God whereon the sacrifice of praise and love is offered, and where He alone dwells. This is the reason why, under the old law, the altar of sacrifice was to be hollow within. Thou shalt not make it solid, but empty and hollow on the inside. It is the will of God that the soul should be empty of all created things, so that it may become a fitting altar of His majesty. He should not endure strange fires on the altar, nor that his own should fail. Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, taking their censers, put fire therein and incense on it, offering before the Lord strange fire, which was not commanded them, and the fire coming out from the Lord destroyed them, and they died before the Lord. Because Nadab and Abihu, sons of Aaron the high priest, offered strange fire on the altar, God in His anger slew them before it. That soul, therefore, which would become a fitting altar, must not be without the love of God, nor mingle therewith any other and strange love. God will never dwell where aught is present beside Himself. Thus, when the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it into the temple of Dagon, their idol was thrown to the ground, and at last broken to pieces. One desire only doth God allow and suffer in His presence, that of perfectly observing His law, and of carrying the cross of Christ. We do not know that He commanded anything, except the book of the law, to be laid up with the ark where the manna was preserved. Take this book, and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the rod of Aaron, type of the cross. Take back the rod of Aaron into the tabernacle of the testimony. That soul which has no other aim than the perfect observance of the law of God, and the carrying of the cross of Christ, will be a true ark containing the true manna, which is God. Chapter 6. 2 great evils of the desires, negative and positive. Proofs from Scripture. To make this matter clear, it is advisable here to explain how the desires inflict these 2 great evils on the soul. These evils are the privation of the Spirit of God, and the fatigue, torture, darkness, defilement, and weakness of that soul which indulges them. My people have done 2 evils, saith God. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living water, and have digged to themselves cisterns, broken cisterns, that can hold no water. These two evils flow from one single act of desire. For it is clear that the instant we set our affections upon any one created thing, our capacity for union with God is diminished in proportion to the intensity of that act of affection. For, as I said before, two contrary qualities cannot coexist in the same subject. The love of God and the love of creature are contrary, the one to the other, and so cannot dwell together in the same heart. What connection is there between the creature and the Creator, between the sensual and the spiritual, the seen and the unseen, the temporal and the eternal, between the heavenly food, pure and spiritual, and the food of the flesh, simply sensual, between the poverty of Christ and selfish attachments? As in natural generation, no new form results without the corruption of the one previously existing, for this obstructs the former by reason of the contrariety between them, so while our souls are under the dominion of the sensual and animal spirit, the pure and heavenly spirit can never enter within them. This explains those words of our Lord: "It is not good to take the bread of children and to cast it to the dogs," and "Give not that which is holy to dogs." Our Lord compares those who, renouncing all earthly desires, prepare themselves in simplicity for the graces of the Holy Ghost, with children, and those who satisfy their desires in earthly things with dogs. Children are admitted to the Father's table, and nourished by the Spirit, but only the crumbs which fall from it are given to the dogs. All created things are but the crumbs which fall from the table of God. Thus they who go about feeding on the creature are rightly called dogs. The children's bread is withheld from such, because they will not rise from the crumbs of the creature to the table of the uncreated Spirit of their Father. These are always hungry like dogs, and justly so, because crumbs excite the appetite rather than appease hunger. These are they of whom it is written, "They shall suffer hunger like dogs, and shall go round about the city, and shall murmur if they be not filled." They who gratify their desires are always morose and discontented, like hungry persons. For what is there in common between the hunger which the creature occasions, and the fullness which proceeds from the Spirit of God? The fullness of God cannot enter into the soul before we drive away the hunger of desire, for two contrary qualities, such as hunger and fullness, cannot dwell together in the same subject. We may see from this how much greater is the work of God in purifying the soul from these contrarieties than it was when He first created it out of nothing. For these rebellious desires and opposing affections seem to resist God more than nothing. That which is not cannot resist His majesty, but not so the love of the creature. Let this suffice for the first great evil which desires inflict on the soul, namely, resistance to the Spirit of God. Let us now proceed to the second, which is manifold in its operations. The desires fatigue, torment, darken, defile, and weaken the soul. Of these 5 forms of evil I shall discuss each separately. As to the first, it is evident that the desires weary the soul, because they resemble little children, restless and dissatisfied, who, always begging of their mother, now one thing, now another, are never content. As the one given to covetousness fatigues himself digging for gold, so the soul wearies itself in the pursuit of those things which the desires demand, and though we may obtain them, yet the end is weariness, because we are never satisfied. We have recourse to broken cisterns, which can hold no water to quench our thirst, as is written, "Faint with thirst, and his soul is empty." The soul which yields to its desires is weary and faint, like one ill of a burning fever, never at rest, and whose thirst increases while the fever lasts. It is written in the book of Job, "When he shall be filled, he shall be straitened, he shall burn, and every sorrow shall fall upon him." Thus it is with the soul, wearied and afflicted by the desires. They wound it, agitate and disturb it, as wind does water, harassing it, so that it can never repose on anything, or in any place. Of such souls it is written, "The wicked are like the raging sea, which cannot rest." The heart of the wicked is like the raging sea, and he is wicked who does not subdue his desires. That soul which seeks to satisfy them wearies and torments itself, and is like one who, in the pains of hunger, opens his mouth to be filled with the wind, and who, instead of being satisfied therewith, becomes still more hungry, for wind is not his meat and drink. Of such it is written, "In the desire of his heart he snuffed up the wind of his love." And again, warning the soul against the increasing dryness toward which it tends, "Keep thy foot, that is thy thoughts, from being bare, and thy throat from thirst." That is, thy will from the gratification of the desire, which is the occasion of greater dryness. As the ambitious man is wearied in the day of disappointed expectations, so the soul, with its desires and their fulfilment, for they make it more empty and hungry than it was before. The desires are, as it is commonly said, like fire which burns when supplied with fuel, but which, when the fuel is consumed, immediately dies away. In truth, the desire is in a much worse condition. The fire is quenched when the fuel fails, but the desire ceases not with the matter on which it fed while it raged, even though that be utterly consumed. For instead of ceasing, like fire when the fuel is burnt out, the desire pines away in weariness, for hunger is increased, and food diminished. A soul in this condition is thus described by the prophet: "He shall turn to the right hand, and shall be hungry, and shall eat on the left hand, and shall not be filled." They who mortify not their desires are justly punished with hunger when they turn to the right hand, that is, when they swerve from the way of God, for they do not deserve the fullness of His sweet Spirit, and justly also shall they not be filled when they eat on the left hand, that is, when they satisfy their desire with created things. For then, abandoning that which can alone satisfy them, they feed on that which is the source of greater hunger. Thus then it is clear that the desires weary and fatigue the soul. Chapter 7. The desires torment the soul. Proofs and illustrations. The second positive evil which the desires inflict is a certain torment and affliction of soul, so that he who suffers therefrom is like one in torture, bound with chains, finding no rest until released. The cords of my sins, that is, my desires, saith the psalmist, have encompassed me. As a man who lies naked amid thorns and briars, so is the soul in the power of its desires. For they pierce, torture, and tear it painfully, as it is written, "They surrounded me like bees, and they burned like fire among thorns." The desires, which are as thorns, increase the fire of affliction and trouble. As the husbandman, greedy of the harvest, goads the oxen at the plough, so concupiscence goads the soul harnessed to its desires, till it shall obtain its will. Such was the desire of Delilah to know the secret of the strength of Samson. She pressed him, giving him no time to rest, so that his soul fainted away, and was wearied even unto death. The desire tortures the soul in proportion to its intensity, so that the pain equals the desires, and the more numerous the desires, the greater the pain. For the words which the Apostle heard are fulfilled even in this life: "As much as she hath glorified herself, and lived in delicacies, so much torment and sorrow give ye to her." As he is tormented who falls into the hands of his enemies, so is the soul carried away by its desires. This truth is foreshadowed in the history of Samson, who was once so strong and free, the judge of Israel. But when he had fallen into the hands of his enemies, they robbed him of his great strength, plucked out his eyes, imprisoned him in a mill, and made him grind, torturing and afflicting him. So it is with the soul, whose enemies, its own desires, live and triumph. Their first act is to weaken and blind the soul, then to torment it, imprisoning it in the mill of concupiscence, and the cords that bind it are its own desires themselves. God, therefore, compassionating those who, with so much toil and cost, go about to satisfy the hunger and thirst of their desires in creative things, thus speaks to them by the mouth of his prophet: All you that thirst and desire, come to the waters, and you that have no money, self-will, make haste, buy and eat, come, buy wine and milk, peace and spiritual sweetness, without money, of self-will, and without price, without that labour which your desires demand. Why do you spend money, of self-will, for that which is not bread, that is, the Spirit of God, and the labour of your desires, for that which doth not satisfy you? Hearken diligently unto me, and eat that which is good, and which you desire, and your soul shall be delighted in fatness. We attain to this fatness when we abandon all created satisfactions, for pain and sorrow flow from the creature, and refreshment from the Spirit of God. Come to me, saith our Lord, all you that labour and are burdened, and I will refresh you. All you who are tormented and afflicted, labouring beneath the burden of anxiety and desire, cast it aside by coming unto me, and I will refresh you. And your souls shall find that rest of which your desires rob you, for they, as a heavy burden, are become heavy upon me. Chapter 8. The desires darken the soul. Proofs and illustrations. The third evil which the desires inflict is darkness and blindness of soul. For as vapours darken the air, and hide the light of the sun, or as a stained mirror cannot clearly receive an image, or as muddy water cannot distinctly reflect his face who looks into it, so the soul, stained by its desires, is intellectually blind, so that neither the understanding itself, nor the sun of natural reason, nor that of the supernatural wisdom of God, can inform and enlighten it. To this the psalmist referred, when he said, My iniquities have overtaken me, and I was not able to see. And thus, while the soul is intellectually blind, the will becomes torpid, the memory fails, and every lawful function is disordered. These faculties depend on the intellect, and it is therefore clear that, when the intellect is embarrassed, they must all be thrown into confusion and disorder. My soul, saith the psalmist, is troubled exceedingly. That is, all my faculties are in disorder. For, as I have said, the intellect in this state cannot receive the illumination of the divine wisdom, just as the obscured air cannot reflect the brightness of the sun. The will cannot embrace God in pure love, just as the stained mirror cannot represent an object placed before it. The memory overclouded by desires cannot calmly dwell on the image of God, just as muddy water cannot reflect the face of him who looks into it. The desire also blinds and darkens the soul, for the desire as such is blind and unreasonable, and reason is that which ever guides the soul aright in its several acts. Hence it is that the soul becomes blind whenever the desires guide it, because it is as one who saw were led by one who saw not, the result being the same as if both were blind. This is what our Lord referred to when he said, If the blind lead the blind, both fall into the pit. Eyes are of little service to the moth, whose desire for the beauty of the light leads it dazzled into the midst of the flame. He who gives the rein to his desires may be likened to the fish dazzled by the light which the fishermen flow over the water, that the nets may not be seen. In this case, light serves but to increase the obscurity. This is the meaning of the psalmist when he says, "Fire hath fallen upon them, and they have not seen the sun." For the desire is like fire, warming with its heat, and dazzling with its light, and the effect of the desire in the soul is, that it enkindles concupiscence, and dazzles the intellect, so that it cannot see. The cause of this dazzling obscurity is the interposition of another light between the object and the eye, whereon the eye rests, so as to see nothing beyond. Thus the desire comes so close to the soul, and within the range of its vision, that we are dazzled and satisfied with the light it gives, so that it hides from us the clear light of the intellect, which we do not, and never shall see, until the glare of the desire shall have ceased. This renders so deplorable their case, who burden themselves with indiscreet penances, and other imprudent methods of devotion, voluntary certainly, on which they rely, thinking such alone, without mortifying their desires in other matters, to be sufficient to lead them on to the union of the divine wisdom. But this can never be, if the desires be not diligently mortified. If these persons bestowed but half their labour on this, they would make greater progress in a month than they can now make in many years, if they persevere in their present ways. As it is necessary to till the earth that it may bring forth fruit, for otherwise nothing will grow therein but weeds, so also it is necessary to mortify our desires, if we are to make progress towards perfection. Without mortification, I say it boldly, we shall make no progress whatever in the knowledge of God and of ourselves, notwithstanding all our efforts, any more than the seed will grow which is thrown away on uncultivated ground. Neither can the darkness and ignorance of our souls be removed, if the desires are not extinguished, for they are like a mote or cataract in the natural eye, obstructing the vision, until it be taken away. The psalmist, considering the blindness of those souls which are under the power of their desires, the impossibility of their clearly beholding the truth, and the greatness of God's anger with them, said, "Before your thorns could know the briar, he swalloweth them up as alive in his wrath." Before your thorns, your desires, harden and grow into a thicket, shutting out the sight of God, as the thread of life is frequently broken in the midst thereof, so will God swallow them up in his anger. Those persons in whom their desires live, and hinder the knowledge of God, God will swallow up in his wrath, either in the next life, in the purifying pains of purgatory, or in this, in afflictions and sufferings, sent to detach them from their desires, or in the mortification of those desires voluntarily undergone. God doeth this to take away the false light of desire between himself and us, which dazzles us, and hinders us from knowing him, and that, the intellect becoming clear, the ravage of desire may be repaired. Oh, that men knew how great a blessing, that of the divine light, this their blindness, the result of their desires, robs them of, and how great the evils they daily fall into, because they do not mortify them. We are not to rely on a clear intellect, or on the gifts received from God, and then imagine that any affections or desires we may indulge in will not blind us, nor cause us to fall into a worse state, little by little. Who would have thought that a man of perfect wisdom, filled with the gifts of God, as Solomon was, could have fallen away in his old age into such blindness and torpor of the will as to build altars to idols and worship them? His affection for his wives, and his negligence in controlling his desires and the satisfactions of his heart, were alone sufficient to reduce him to this. So he tells us himself, saying, "Whatsoever my eyes desired, I refused them not, and I withheld not my heart from enjoying every pleasure." Such was the effect upon Solomon of unbridled desires, and their gratification, though at first he was cautious, They soon blinded his understanding, and at last put out the light of wisdom within him, so that in his old age he forsook God. And if unmortified desires could produce such a disaster in the case of Solomon, who knew so well the difference between good and evil, what shall they not produce in us who are so ignorant? We are like the people of Nineveh, of whom God said, "They know not how to distinguish between their right hand and their left, since at every step we take good for evil and evil for good, and this is as it were natural to us." What then must it be when our desires are added to our natural blindness, but that which the prophet bewailed, speaking of those who love to follow after their desires? We have groped for the wall, and like the blind, we have groped as if we had no eyes, we have stumbled at noon, as if in the darkness. Such is he who is blinded by his desires, for in the presence of the truth and his real interests, he cannot see them any more than if he had been utterly blind. Chapter 9. The desires pollute the soul. Proofs from Scripture. The fourth evil which the desires inflict on the soul is that they pollute and defile it, as it is written, "He that toucheth pitch shall be defiled with it." He then toucheth pitch who satisfies the desires of the will in any created thing. Observe here that the wise man compareth the creature with pitch. For there is a greater distance between the excellence of the soul and the noblest creature than there is between the glittering diamond or fine gold and pitch. As a diamond or a piece of gold, if placed heated in contact with pitch, becomes foul and stained in proportion to the heat, so the soul inflamed by the desire it may entertain for the creature, draws corruption therefrom and defilement. And there is a greater difference between the soul and all other created corporal beings than there is between the most pellucid water and the foulest mud. So then, as such water mingled with mud becomes foul, so the soul whose affections are set on created things becomes polluted. So then, as such water mingled with mud becomes foul, so the soul whose affections are set on created things becomes polluted, for then it resembles them. As soot defiles the most beautiful face, so the unruly desires of the soul, if indulged in, defile and pollute that soul, which is in itself the most beautiful and perfect image of God. The prophet Jeremiah, bewailing the ravages of corruption produced by these unruly desires, first of all describes the beauty of the soul and then its defilement. Her Nazarites were whiter than snow, purer than milk, more ruddy than the old ivory, fairer than the sapphire. Their faces now made blacker than coals, and they are not known in the streets. The hair of the Nazarites signify the thoughts and affections of the soul, which, ordered according to the law of God, that is referred all to Him, are whiter than snow, purer than milk, more ruddy than the old ivory, fairer than the sapphire. The whole physical creation in all its beauty and magnificence is signified by these four things, and higher than all is the soul of man and its operations, that is, the Nazarites with their long hair, which when ordered not according to the commandments of God, that is, when occupied with created things, is now made blacker than coals. All this and far greater ruin befalls the soul's beauty from the indulgence of unruly desires. So then, if my object were to describe the foul and corrupt condition to which the desires reduce the soul, I should not be able to find anything so full of cobwebs and worms, not even corruption itself, wherewith to compare it. For though the disordered soul, in its natural substance, be as perfect as God has made it, its reasonable substance is foul, filthy, and dark, overladen with all these evils, and even more. Even one unruly desire, as I shall hereafter explain, though not a mortal sin, sullies and deforms the soul, and indisposes it for the perfect union with God, until it be cast away. What, then, must be the corruption of that soul which is wholly disordered, which has abandoned itself to the sway of its desires, and how far removed from the purity of God! No language can describe, no understanding can comprehend, the diverse impurities which diverse desires produce in the soul. If, indeed, any description of this could be given, so that men might understand it, it would be a matter for wonder and for great pity. For each desire, according to its nature and intensity, deposits the filth and sediment of corruption and uncleanness in the soul, every one in its own way. For as the soul of the just man, in a single perfection, which is the justice thereof, possesses innumerable rich gifts, and many virtues of exceeding beauty, every one of them lovely, different from each other according to the multitude and variety of the acts of the love of God, so the disordered soul in the same way, according to the multitude of the desires, the object of which are created things, contracts a miserable diversity of vileness and impurity, with which those desires pollute it. These diverse pollutions are described by the prophet Ezekiel, when God showed him the interior of the temple, with its walls painted round about with the likenesses of creeping things, and all abominable and unclean beasts. I went in, saith the prophet, and saw, and behold every form of creeping things, and of living creatures, the abomination, and all the idols of the house of Israel were painted on the wall round about. When the prophet had seen this, God said to him, Surely thou seest, O Son of man, what the ancients of the house of Israel do in the dark, every one private in his chamber. Turn thee again, thou shalt see greater abominations. The prophet turned, and, behold, women sat there mourning for Adonis. Turn thee again, said God to the prophet, and thou shalt see greater abominations than these. And then the prophet saw, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, 25 men having their backs to the temple of the Lord. The various creeping things and unclean beasts painted on the walls of the temple within are the thoughts and conceptions of the intellect derived from the vile things of earth and of other created things, which, because contrary to those that are eternal, defile the temple of the soul, and the soul by means thereof embarrasses the intellect, which is its first court. The women in the second court, mourning for Adonis, are the desires of the will, the second faculty of the soul. These weep, as it were, when they covet that on which the will is bent, that is, the unclean things painted on the understanding. The men in the third court are the fancies and imaginations resulting from created objects which the third faculty of the soul, the memory, preserves and dwells on. These had their backs to the temple of the Lord, for when the faculties of the soul have been completely occupied with any object of earth, the soul itself may be said to have turned its back upon God's temple, which is right reason, and which tolerates nothing that is in opposition to God. Let this suffice for the present, to give us some insight into the foul disorder which desires engender in the soul. For were I to treat separately of the impediment to divine union which these imperfections and their varieties occasion, of that of venial sin, which is much greater than that of imperfections and of its varieties, and also of mortal sin, which is complete defilement, and of its various forms, I should never come to an end. What I say, and it is to the purpose, is, that every single desire, though it be but the slightest imperfection, darkens the soul, and hinders its perfect union with God. Chapter 10. The desires make the soul lukewarm and enfeeble virtue. Proofs and illustrations. The fifth evil inflicted on the soul by its desires is lukewarmness and feebleness, so that it has no strength to follow after virtue nor to persevere therein. As the strength of desire is diminished when it is applied to many objects, instead of being concentrated upon one, and the more numerous the objects embraced, the less is the energy with which each is sought, so philosophers say is it with virtue, which is more vigorous when united than when it is dispersed. It is therefore clear that if the desire of the will be directed to other objects than virtue, it must be most ineffectual in the pursuit thereof. The soul whose will is divided among trifles is like water which never rises, because it has an outlet below, and is therefore profitless. Thus it was that the patriarch Jacob compared Reuben his son to water poured out, because he had given way to his desires in a certain sin. Thou art poured out as water, grow thou not. That is, because thou art poured out as water in thy desires, thou shalt not grow in virtues. As boiling water left uncovered quickly loses its heat, and as aromatic spices exposed to the air gradually lose their fragrance and the strength of their perfume, so the soul not recollected in the love of God alone loses the heat and vigour of virtue. This truth was well understood by the psalmist when he said, I will keep my strength to Thee. That is, I will concentrate the strength of my affections on Thee alone. The desires enfeeble the soul, for they are like the little twigs and suckers which grow on a tree, sapping its strength so that it shall not be so fruitful. Of such souls the Saviour says, Woe unto them that are with child, and that give suck in those days. This signifies the desires, which, if not cut off, will continually lessen the strength of the soul, and grow to be its ruin, like the suckers on a tree. Our Lord therefore warns us, saying, Let your loins be girt. The loins are the desires. They are also like leeches sucking the blood from the veins, for so the wise man calls them, saying, The horse leech hath two daughters, the desires, that say, Bring, bring. It is, therefore, evident that the desires bring no good at all to the soul, but rather deprive it of what it has, and if we do not mortify them, they will not rest until they have done what the young vipers are said to do to their mother. These, as they grow in the womb, devour the entrails of their mother, and kill her, preserving their own life at the cost of hers. Thus the unmortified desires grow and devour the soul, killing the life of God within it. They alone live in that soul, because that soul has not destroyed them first. This it is that made the wise man pray, Take from me the greediness of the belly. But even if the desires do not issue in this great calamity, it is lamentable to see how they torture the poor soul in which they dwell, how hateful to itself they render it, how profitless it is to its neighbours, how dull and slothful in the things of God. There are no corrupt humours which can so bow down a sick man, enfeeble him in his gait, and make him loathe his proper food, as the desire of the creature bows down the soul in sadness, and indisposes it for the practice of virtue. And in general, the reason why many souls have no love or inclination for virtue is, that they entertain affections and desires which are not innocent, nor directed toward our Lord God. Chapter 11. The necessity of freedom from all desires, however slight, for the divine union. It seems reasonable here for the reader to ask, whether it be necessary to mortify completely every desire, small and great, before perfection can be reached, or whether it will be enough to have mortified some of them, overlooking others, at least those which seem of less moment, because it is a matter most difficult to attain to such pureness and detachment as to have no affection for anything remaining in the will. To this I reply, in the first place, it is true that all the desires are not equally hurtful, neither do they perplex the soul in the same degree. I am speaking of those which are voluntary, for the natural desires, when we do not consent to them, and when they do not pass beyond the first movements, do but slightly or not at all stand in the way of union. By natural and first movements, I mean all those in which the natural will had no share, either before or after they arose. For to banish and mortify these completely is, in this life, impossible. The hindrance which these create is not such as to prevent the divine union, though they may not be wholly mortified. They may remain in our nature, and yet the soul in its spiritual part may be most free from them. For it will sometimes happen that the soul enjoys the profound union of quiet in the will, while these remain in the sensual portion of man's nature, but having no communication with the spiritual portion, occupied in prayer. But all the other voluntary desires, whether mortal sins, which are the most grievous, or of venial sins, which are the less so, or imperfections only, which are still less so, must be banished away, and the soul which would attain to perfect union must be delivered from them all, however slight they may be. The reason is this: the estate of divine union consists in the total transformation of the will into the will of God, in such a way that every movement of the will shall be always the movement of the will of God only. This is the reason why, in this state, two wills are said to be one, my will and God's will, so that the will of God is also that of the soul. But if the soul then cleaves to any imperfection, contrary to the will of God, his will is not done, for the soul wills that which God wills not. It is clear, therefore, that if the soul is to be united in love and will with God, every desire of the will must first of all be cast away, however slight it may be. That is, we must not deliberately and knowingly assent with the will to any imperfection, and we must have such power over it, and such liberty, as to reject every such desire the moment we are aware of it. I say knowingly, for with deliberation and clear perception of what we are doing, or because it is not wholly in our power, we may easily give way to imperfections and venial sins, and to those natural desires of which I have just spoken. It is of such sins as these, not so entirely voluntary, that it is written, a just man shall fall 7 times, and shall rise again. But as to those voluntary and perfectly deliberate desires, how slight soever their objects may be, any one of them not overcome is sufficient to prevent this union. I am speaking of the unmortified habit thereof, because certain acts occasionally have not so much power, for the habit of them is not settled. Still we must get rid of them, for they too proceed from habitual imperfection. Such habits of voluntary imperfections, so far as they are not perfectly overcome, impede not only the divine union, but our progress towards perfection. These habitual perfections are, for instance, much talking, certain attachments, which we never resolve to break through, such as to individuals, to a book or a cell, to a particular food, to certain society, the satisfaction of one's taste, science, news, and such things. Every one of these imperfections, if the soul is attached and habituated to them, results in such serious injuries to our growth and progress in perfection. Yes, even if we fall daily into many other imperfections greater than these, provided they are not the result of the habitual indulgence of any evil inclination, we should not be so much hindered in our spiritual course as we are by this selfish attachment of the soul to particular objects. For while the soul entertains it, it is useless to hope that we can ever attain to perfection, even though the object of our attachment be but of the slightest importance possible. Does it make any difference whether a bird be held by a slender thread or by a rope, when the bird is bound and cannot fly till the cord that holds it is broken? It is true that a slender thread is more easily broken. Still, notwithstanding, if it is not broken, the bird cannot fly. This is the state of a soul with particular attachments. It never can attain to the liberty of the divine union, whatever virtues it may possess. Desires and attachments affect the soul as the remora is said to affect a ship, that is, but a little fish, yet when it adheres to the vessel, it effectively prevents its progress. How sad it is to see certain souls, like vessels richly freighted, full of good works, of spiritual exercises, virtues and gifts of God, which, because they have not the courage to break with certain tastes, attachments, or affections, these are all one, never reach the haven of perfect union. And yet it would cost them but a single vigorous flight to break the thread of their attachment, or to shake off the remora of desire. It is a matter of deep regret, when God has given them strength to burst other and stronger bonds, those of vanity and sins, merely because they will not detach themselves from trifles, which God has left for them to break away from, for love of Him, and which are no more than a single thread, that they should for this neglect their own advancement and the attainment of so great a blessing. And what is still more deplorable, because of such attachments, not only do they not advance, but so far as perfection is concerned, they fall back, losing in some measure what they had already gained with so much labour. For it is well known that on the spiritual road, not to go on overcoming self is to go backwards, and not to increase our gain is to lose. This is what our Lord would teach us when He says, "He that gathereth not with me scattereth." He who will neglect to repair the vessel that is but slightly cracked will at last lose all the liquor it may hold. For he that contemneth small things shall fall little by little, and of one spark cometh a great fire. One imperfection is enough to beget another, and this other others again. We shall never see a soul negligent in overcoming a single desire, which has not also many other desires arising out of the weakness and imperfection from which the first proceeds. There have been many persons who, by the grace of God, had made great progress in detachment and freedom, and yet because they gave way, under the pretence of some good, as of society and friendship, to petty attachments, have thereby lost the spirit and sweetness of God, holy solitude, and cheerfulness, and have injured the integrity of their spiritual exercises, so as to be unable to stop before all was gone. All this has befallen them because they did not root out the principle of pleasure and of the sensual desires, keeping themselves in solitude for God. We must ever walk on this road so as to reach the end, that is, in the constant repression of our desires, and not in their indulgence. And if we do not perfectly repress them, we shall never perfectly reach the end. As wood can never be transformed into fire, if but one degree of heat necessary for that end be wanting, so the soul that has but one imperfection can never be perfectly transformed in God, as I shall hereafter explain when speaking of the night of faith. The soul has but one will, and if this will be occupied or embarrassed, it is not free, perfect, solitary, and pure, as it ought to be for this divine transformation. This truth is foreshadowed in the book of Judges, where we read that an angel of the Lord came to the children of Israel, and told them that, because they had not destroyed the inhabitants of the land, but had made a league with some of them, those, therefore, would be left among them as their enemies, and an occasion to them of their fall and destruction. Wherefore I would not destroy them from before your face, that you may have enemies, and their gods may be your ruin. God is just in thus dealing with those souls whom He has led forth out of the Egypt of this world, for whom He has slain the giants of their sins, and whose enemies He has destroyed, which are the occasions of sin which they meet with in the world, and all this for the sole purpose of their entrance into the promised land of the divine union. He is just, I say, in thus dealing with them, when He sees them form friendships, and become confederate with the heathen, which are their imperfections, when they do not mortify themselves wholly, but are negligent and slothful in their lives. For this, then, He becomes angry with them, and suffers them to fall through their desires from bad to worse. This truth is also shadowed forth in the command of God to Joshua when the children of Israel were about to enter into the land of promise. The city of Jericho was to be utterly destroyed, and all that was within, man and woman, young and old, together with the cattle, and the people were not to take, nor even to touch, any of the spoil thereof. He, therefore, that will enter into the divine union must put to death all that lives in his soul, whether small or great, many or few. He must abstain from all desire thereof, and be completely detached therefrom, as if neither existed for the other. St. Paul, also writing to the Corinthians, says the same thing. This therefore I say, brethren, the time is short. It remaineth, that they also who have wives be as if they had none, and they that weep as though they wept not, and they that rejoice as if they rejoiced not, and they that buy as though they possessed not, and they that use this world as if they used it not. The Apostle teaches here that we must be detached in spirit from the world, if we would walk so as to attain unto God.